So what's driving this once again is a geological model, in that they are looking for the upper surface and then trying to figure out then, based on the dips, how they put it out. So that's kind of a dip meter application then in the mid-continent. Schlumberger, interestingly enough, applied this a lot up in Canada, where they have very thick Devonian reefs, with colossal draping features on those reefs, and they would use those in cases where they missed the reef to not only figure out which direction to go, but also how far they needed to go. They had phenomenal success using that kind of methodology. So that was back in the 60s when, let's say, we had Schlumberger right here in Wichita, and they'd go out and do a bit of that logging right out there. Now, we kind of move forward, and that gets us more exotic, shall we say, and that is where we're looking now at the Formation Microscanner, FMS, and here we see the tool involved, and you can see then, it kind of looks like that picture I showed of a dip meter. So things have changed. Instead of having one electrode on each of these pads, we've got a bunch of them. So we're measuring a whole bunch of micro-resistivities at these contact points with the hole. So like all the other logging tools, the tool will be lowered to the bottom of the hole, and then it'll be brought up within the hole, and then we'll get records then of the micro-resistivity, multiple points on each pad. So this is a nice example because it illustrates what's going on. Here we are down in Butler County in the El Dorado field, and for reasons I don't know why, they ran an FMS. And what you're looking at here then is the Oread limestone. So over here in track number 1 we got the gamma ray, so there's the shale. We've got the limestone here, we've got a nice black shale here, another limestone below. And then over here what we've got then is all these micro-resistivity curves. So there are 4 of them, we got a bunch. But that's what's actually being recorded. The other thing that's happening on both the Formation Microscanner and the dip meter is in this track here, you can see azimuth and deviation. Because as that tool is being pulled up through the hole, then on the one hand it's turning. So if we're going to try and get dips and strikes relative to true north and true vertical, we need to have a compass then on the tool that tells us which way the pads are pointing. And so that's what this azimuth is about as it's rotating for the hole. The other aspect too is that in many cases the holes will not be absolutely vertical, which means that the tool is actually tilted at an angle to the vertical, and we need to correct for that. And so that's where we have the borehole deviation angle. We can pick that up. And you can see, for example, that if we were looking at a dip meter or a Formation Microscanner run, say, an offshore well, they deliberately drill their holes at all sorts of angles. So you better have that compass in there, the azimuth. But essentially that's the information, so that when we start to see images and dips, they will be related to true vertical and true north. Now as we look at this, we say, okay, this is our image, but we can't see much in it. And this is where the processing goes on, that each of these curves here, they change into a gray level image. And they try to do the gray level image where it kind of looks like a rock type. So they will simply code these where the highest resistivities will be white, the lowest resistivities will be black, and anything between will be various shades of gray. Now let's see how that works out. So there it is. There is, quote, the image. It looks a little crude because this is one of the old FMS, but now you're seeing those individual wiggles have been color-coded on a gray level scale. So remember I said black is going to be the lowest resistivity, or if you like the most conductive. There's the shale section up there, and it's coming out black. And here's other shales down below, we can see. Whereas meanwhile the higher resistivity beds are coming out white or intermediate shades of gray. So on that notion there, if we look within this, we see there's our limestone, and some of the blacks here that we see, right there, there's a shale bed, that's matching up where the gamma ray is showing it. But now the resolution's phenomenal, so we can say, yep, that's the top of the shale and there's the bottom. Because our resolution's getting down to 1/4 of an inch or less. Whereas this gamma ray here is just simply saying, I see something shaly. But because of the averaging of the gamma ray tool, we'd say, well, I couldn't tell whether that's simply a shaly limestone or whether that's a shale bed that's getting averaged out. And I say, looks to me like a shale bed right there. One of the things we can look at too is we see these features here. Look at that, cutting right across. That'll be a fracture. But in most cases, when you're looking at an image, that will be a drilling-induced fracture. And you bet that's what that is right there. If you get processing done for you, and you are interested in natural fractures, it'll be the issue of determining which are drilling-induced and which are natural fractures. And we'll get back to that later, but that, of course, is one of the major applications then of the FMI. What's really cool about it is if you actually do see a natural fracture in the system, you could even tell whether it's an open fracture or a closed fracture. Because if it's an open fracture, it's full of mud filtrate and it's conductive, so it'll show black. Whereas if it was a sealed fracture, it had calcite cement in it, it would show up as white because that would be a high resistive feature. Now the other thing about it is that we look at what are we looking at the image. All where we see the imaging there is that's where the pad is making contact with the borehole wall. Where we see the white bands in between, that is the gaps in between the arms. So they're continually trying to improve the technology to get more and more coverage of it. So looking at it then, like I say, we can easily distinguish then the shales, particularly up here is the black. Look at this bed here, the gamma ray is dropping down, very tight limestone. The other features too, of course, is as we look in the cleaner sections here, we will start to see responses that are not simply a function of the shale content, but the porosity. Because we might have a clean bed, very low gamma ray, and we say, it's not shale. So the patterns we pick up then in the blacks and the grays are where we have porosity. And we'll see another carbonate example, we'll see an Arbuckle example where that becomes exceedingly obvious. The reason I chose this, I always show, of course, to KU students because it's Rock Chalk, Jayhawk, Mount Orad, but underground, it's under the El Dorado. What I liked about it was that at least we saw the step that was done. I was saying, that's what's actually being measured, and this is what comes from processing. So I sometimes had to pinch myself to remember that it's an electrical image we're seeing, not an optical image, because it's sometimes amazing. The very first time I ever saw an image log was back in the mid-80s, and Schlumberger had a presentation, and they showed an image log from the Rotliegender sandstone under the North Sea. And it was insane. I could not only see crossbeds, I could see little pebbles and everything. And I thought it was all over. I felt as if somebody punched me in the stomach. I thought, that's it. We can see everything now. But it's not quite that way. The technology did come out in the 80s, but they chose an unfortunate year to introduce it. It was the time when oil prices crashed. And so the FMI then, along with some of the other logs, has taken a little bit of time to get back into the process. But let's look at another example. So that's simply Pennsylvania limestone. Whoops. Well, actually, there is a result. They perforated, you can see right here and here. I have not been able to locate the scout ticket on this, so I'd like to be able to tie it up and say what production they got. But otherwise, as we look at the logs, since they're here, gamma ray and caliper, we've seen before. Nicely on gauge, there's our limestone. Here in the center, they've done processing to figure out how much calcite and shales within it. We saw how that's done with the Roma-Yuma plot. The photoelectric curve, look right here on the 5, says that's a limestone. And over here then we have the neutron and the density overlaid. To a certain extent the neutron is pulling away a little bit because it's a slightly shaly limestone. You see the shale there? That's making the neutron read a little higher, and also dragging then the photoelectric curve then below the 5. So once again, as we look at our logs, we don't think of which is the log I should run to have all the answers. You think of a package to put together that makes sense. You say, what are the kind of things I need to know? What's the package I need to put together?